Because
Yeah.
I think partly like what I'm realizing when you're criticizing something is like, it's like you don't need to sentence someone to multiple life sentences, you know? It's like if you've already given enough reason to cut this stanza, then you don't necessarily need to give a new true reason. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. This week we have another installment of Listener Crit for you. A couple more listeners sent in poems bravely and generously for us to provide with a frank anonymous critique. So I have Cameron with me. We talk about two poems on this main feed, and then on the Secret Show, there's one longer poem that we take on, which is, I'll just say it's very different than the usual fare. And I think we had a surprisingly rich conversation about it, though it's not exactly a kind of poem either of us would normally get excited about. If you would like to submit a poem for Listener Crit, you can join the Secret Show at SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. There's a whole slew of episodes up there now and a new one every week in addition to the main feed show. And you can send a poem to SLEERICKETS@gmail.com. We'll do these regularly, and if you stay a member, you can keep submitting poems. So if that sounds appealing to you, maybe listen to this episode and decide if it sounds appealing to you. But the purpose of the series is to do in public what is seldom done at all, which is to take on a poem in progress thoughtfully, respectfully, but also really honestly. All right, so a few orders of business. First, Tar River Poetry is open for submission, not for much longer, though. I think it is just for the month of September, I believe, is the open period. If you are a subscriber, you get you have slightly more robust submission privileges, but you can go to tarriverpoetry.com, submit a poem or some poems, submit a piece of prose. I'm the prose editor there. We don't publish a whole lot of prose, and we don't tend to publish just straight ahead single volume reviews for the most part, although you can always try me. If you have a question about prose you might be interested in submitting, just write me an email at tarriverprose@gmail.com. If you have any SLEERICKETS related business, you can write to SLEERICKETS@gmail.com, or you can just mix and match those two. Either way, I'll get it. So you can submit to Tar River Poetry. Literary Matters is open for submission. I think they're open most of the school year at least. You can check that out. Cameron is the new poetry editor, and I know he is hard at work with Emily Grace and maybe a couple of other people. I have maybe some more good news over there to be announcing soon. I will say, I just like a lot of SLEERICKETS related people have had like good news lately that is not yet quite shareable, but some just good to hear all around. What is shareable is that apparently I worked my lathe of heaven like podcasting abilities, and after complaining in a recent episode that the editorial staff of Rattle needs to get to know Maury Creech and his work, Maury has now won the Rattle Poetry Prize for like what is it? It's like $16,000 for a poem. Like $1,000 a line, I think, for the length of that poem. So very well done, Maury. Congratulations to him. And well done to Rattle for finally getting your shit together and realizing who Maury Creech is. Now all of the other poetry magazines in the country need to get the memo. Oh, Helena, who's the editor-in-chief of Tar River, mentioned that there is an event for any North Carolina listeners. There is a Tar River Poetry event this weekend at the North Carolina Museum of Art, which is having an end paper festival. It's like a books and publishing festival at the NCMA. There's also a reading of some poems by winners of the Tar River Poetry Ekphrasis contest. That'll be starting at 11 at the North Carolina Museum of art. Oh, so there was let's see, I think it's already been paywalled because she like publishes things and then paywalls them instantly. But Lit Mag News, I think it's Betsy Took's. Becky Took does Lit Mag News on Substack, and she posted an essay which I luckily opened on my phone, and then she instantly paywalled it, so I was able to read it. But the essay was written in response to a tweet by Katie Dozier-Green from Rattle. The tweet was, "What if every published poem was accompanied with a little essay about why the editor chose it?" Adding to this initial post, she later wrote, "I suspect that if all poetry editors had to do this truthfully, many would be, I asked X poet to send me poems. This is what they sent. We need more transparency in poetry." The longer essay that Becky Took wrote was about whether it is it unethical for lit mags to conceal what portion of work is solicited? Isn't the bias towards solicited work one that ought to be disclosed? The essay is all about whether soliciting work for a magazine is ethical at all, and then the argument is that all literary magazines should publish the percentage of their work that is solicited. There was, I think I mentioned, a little brief dust up on Erratosphere because of a misunderstanding of that seemed to suggest that all of the poems in Literary Matters were solicited. That is not true. That is, to my knowledge, never been true. It is definitely, as far as I know, as long as I've been involved, always published poems from the slush pile. But this question of solicitation came up, and it was funny because so here's the deal. We always took poems from the slush pile in Literary Matters, but because of the, by my lights, unethical submissions policy that restricted submissions officially to members of the ALSCW, we did not get flooded with submissions the way a lot of poetry magazines do. I think there are poetry magazines that just get a never-ending fire hose of submissions, and for those magazines, I think solicitation is maybe a different kind of question. I will say what the first editorial experience I had was for Verse. Back in college, I was a reader for them. I read every poem that came in for a couple of years, and along with a number of other undergrads, and we had to write up little comments on them and submit them to the editor. To my knowledge, during my time there, 0 slush pile submissions were published. I can't say for sure, but my recollection and my knowledge at the time was that 100% of what the magazine published was solicited. So that seems like bad form. The New Yorker, I think, has all but acknowledged that the fiction policy is the same, that basically the fiction submittable account for the New Yorker is a placebo account. I think that is true for some magazines. I think it's that does seem pretty unscrupulous. What surprised me about the Becky Took piece was the surprise. Like, do people not think poetry magazines solicit work? Like, huh? Is that really? You don't think poetry magazines solicit any work? Again, with Literary Matters, had we not solicited work and only published what of the slush pile we took, it wouldn't have been a magazine. Part of the goal in solicitation was just to let people know that they could submit. As always, I encouraged people who were not members to submit. And a lot of my solicitations were aimed at people who were not especially well known. What I didn't want was just to reach out to people who already were very well established. And we were reading some poems by, I think it was Saeed Jones. And Cameron said, "Oh, we should solicit some poems from him." I looked up his contact information. He's publishing poems in the New Yorker, in the Atlantic. He's got multiple agents to handle his poetry, his prose, and his public speaking. Basically, we couldn't have solicited work from him if we wanted to. He was an extreme case. But very often, if somebody is extremely well established, you don't really want to bother to solicit poems from that person because all you are going to get is the name. You're not going to get good work. You're not going to get what that person considers to be his good work. He will be sending you his C and D material, and there's no point in publishing that. I was never interested in publishing that. I definitely solicited work and then rejected it. Rejected work from poets, venerable poets I admire. So I do think Literary Matters is a little different. I had an interesting conversation with Helena at Tar River, and I won't, spill the beans, but, it was illuminating because Tar River does get a flood of submissions. And so while I have this sort of relationship, I have a relationship with poets. Some poets have sent me poems in the last week or two, either thinking they were submitting to Literary Matters, in which case I forwarded them, or just sort of like touching base with me about what I might or might not be interested in, one magazine or another. And I may still do some solicitation. I like solicitation because I like reading poems. I like reading poems by poets I had never heard of and then looking them up, especially if they're not well known, especially if they haven't published a whole lot, and trying to cultivate them. That's exciting to me. So I may do a little bit of that. But again, Tar River gets a shit ton of submissions, which is just a new phenomenon for me. So mostly I think I'm going to worry about the prose. But yeah, it was interesting. I just thought it was a strange essay by Becky too. Kind of thought a lot of the conversation in public was just strange in general. Surely if you accept submissions, especially if you charge for submissions, you should be publishing from the slush pile. But maybe the question really is, how much do you get that is unsolicited? Because if you're getting a ton that's unsolicited, and you're still publishing a lot of solicited work, then maybe you just need to publish less. Maybe everybody needs to just publish less. Now, please enjoy our conversation about 2 poems by anonymous listeners. Thank you to those listeners for sending their poems in bravely and selflessly, and thank you to you all for listening. So this is The Ballerina, and I assigned this poem the letter W for the author. And again, there's some rhyme and reason, but not a consistent one to giving these poems author initials just for the sake of conversation. So this is The Ballerina by W. She turned away, arms arched into a dome of fingers as she fell in with her troupe. The ballerina wore a suit of foam white lace, sequins of silver, and a loop of tulle across her waist. The figure 8 broke, and she vaulted with her peerless silhouette. Her tiptoes tapped across the stage. Her fate was now to turn and begin a pirouette. She swirled, gleaming eyes aquarium like azure, like a flying gray falcon. She leaped upward with Degazian aplomb. Her back and legs and arms arched like a talon. Her falling legs' fracture left the gallery, soundless at time's hushing fragility. So that's The Ballerina by W.
Yeah. I feel like before I get to the poem, I just want to say, I feel like it's not said enough in this podcast, but you are, especially as opposed to me, but I think as opposed to many people, an excellent reader of poetry. And it's always a pleasure to hear you read the poems. So I don't know. I feel like this isn't said often, and I feel like I wanted to.
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, all right. No objections there.
A brief intrusion of sentiment.
Yeah,
welcome.
Accepted. I like ballet. I like ballerina poems. As I mentioned, I taught at a ballet school and spent a lot of time around ballerinas. And they are like amazing, weird little animals. And they're much, much more like athletes than anything else. And it's a cruel art form. I mean, it is really ruthless. And they are, they're teeny little things, but they're incredibly strong and ferocious. And even the costuming is amazing. Like I was just looking, because I was looking at tulle, which is one of the substances used, one of the fabrics used in costumes, and specifically in tutus. Tulle, or is it tulle? Tulle? I don't know.
Tulle.
Tulle.
Okay, sorry, I've only seen it spelled. So
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
know it appears in Dickinson uses it some as
yeah.
well.
Well, exactly. Yes, you identify
Yeah,
where I've seen
it's like
it, but
it's
yeah,
a thin kind of netting like fabric, but it's used in tutus. I think it's the primary substance
interesting.
in the tutus, at least I think of. Tutus, by the way, having seen them up close, like they're amazing garments. Like they're just
Mm,
like a classic stiff tutu is just like a fabulously intricately constructed object, and they're really like
interesting.
tough. They're like very
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So like I'm you definitely win me over. We're gonna we're gonna talk about some of the subjects that
Mhm.
we talked about literary matters, and we will. I think by the time this comes out, we may have some other news already out about literary matters. But we'd mentioned before, like the fair and unfair prejudices, and I have some
Right.
unfair prejudices, including, as we learn later, it turns out it's hard to win me over with bodily fluids, but like I'm game for a ballet poem, but then it's tough to do. And I thought of Alex McCune's observation, which came up on the Secret Show, but is definitely worth returning to, which is when we had previously talked about the rhyme driving the bus in a poem, often what was actually meant or what was actually being described was that the denotation, the meaning of the poem was driving the bus, and the rhyme was being
Mm,
dragged into place along the way, so that
slavishly.
there was sort of a rigid demand for the poem to mean a certain thing, and then any nearest rhyme would do. And I do
Right,
feel like
right.
that does seem to be what's happening throughout a lot of this poem.
Okay, okay. Well, okay. Well, before we, approach it,
Sure.
because I feel like I have two levels of problems with this poem. I have a lot
Okay.
of problems on the line level, which
Hmm.
we can
Yeah,
go
yeah.
through line by line and discuss. And I have some conceptual problems with the poem. So I guess like what would you prefer to do? Do you want to go linguistically and then sort of elevate conceptually, or do you want to go conceptually and then go to linguistically?
Uh, let's start with form. Let's just talk about because
Okay.
it's a sonnet. So let's
Yes,
talk about
it's a
the how
sonnet.
it handles the meter and the rhyme, because I think you could say some words about both of those.
So it's what's a rhyme scheme? Sorry, I'm just
I think
rehearsing
it's
this.
English sonnet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. No, yes, sorry. I'm being dumb. Yes, it's just a perfect English sonnet in
Yeah, there's a little
form.
extra carriage return after the second
Yeah,
line,
yeah.
but yeah. Yeah, it's an English sonnet. Dome, troop, foam, loop, eight, silhouette, fate, pirouette, aquarium, falcon, aplomb, talon, gallery, fragility. So
Mm.
mostly true rhymes, but of course,
And
that
okay,
last one,
well,
yeah, that last one is
yeah.
quite far. Gallery and fragility.
Well, like, this is maybe starting chronologically wrongly, but like the application of true rhyme to half rhyme, I think, is totally wrong. Like that, where there are half rhymes, I mean, I'm not just I don't know, I can't completely
The,
memorize the rhyme scheme, so I don't know if there are other
yeah,
half rhymes, but the final
there's
couplet,
some that are I have some questions about, but they're mostly truish, pretty
yeah.
true rhymes. Yeah,
Apart from the final couplet, which I think is like that is the zone you want true rhymes to occur. Like the final
right.
couplet, I think it screws up because it's not true rhymes, and like the entire form, both our expectation within the movement of the form and our expectation if we are, at least, well, I guess nowadays hyper-literate readers who understand what the Shakespearean sonnet is, our entire expectation is moving towards, the closing revelatory or just closing interesting thud of that final couplet. And that thud never
Yeah.
comes because it's half rhymes.
Yeah, yeah. The Yeats line, the poem should come right with a click like a Chinese box, and we're
Mm,
thinking of those lacquered
yeah.
wooden boxes. And I would imagine that the argument in favor of that is that the performance is also disturbed at the end because the ballerina's leg breaks. But
Yeah.
again, if your goal is mimesis, then you probably want a more jarring dissonance there, right? Because right now
Mm,
you have a sort of an odd triplet rhyme, sort of it's. I mean, I guess gallery fragility. So I guess you say re and t is the true rhyme,
right.
but it's a
Yeah.
very weak, odd true rhyme, particularly if the goal is sort of the violent snap of a breaking
Yeah.
bone. It seems like there's some other possibilities there, including the use of the line break. And I would say that line breaks are another source of trouble in this poem.
But
just to sort of like stick with form for a moment, I would, a note I have about the rhyme. That I think the last one is tricky. Falcon and Talon. That's the other like real off one. And it's odd because they so match, right, thematically.
yeah,
Falcon and
right.
Talon go together in a way that is unrelated to the subject matter, but related to each other. So it is,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
a way,
yeah.
it's sort of like they are similar sounding in being off rhyme, but they match in terms of subject matter, but it's not clear why that would be something for like our attention is being drawn to it, but it's not clear to me what the benefit of that is. The other
Mm.
one that I caught on a little bit was silhouette and pirouette. Typically, if I were to rhyme pirouette or silhouette, I would try to rhyme it with a word that gives a harder stress in the last syllable and that is not also structured with the same, that doesn't have the same, like French spelling and even spelling into the previous syllable. So these
Right.
are
Well, I
both
thought,
words that end with Ouette. And so like like even something like cigarette would give you a little bit of a
yeah.
different feel, but forget would be a cleaner pairing of the sound, because again, like that's what you want
Mm.
with a rhyme is you want the sound to match, although the words have almost nothing else in common. You want the denotation to be clear and crisp, and you want the sounds to match perfectly, but you don't want the two words to be paired in part of speech, in structure, certainly not in spelling, in origin language. I mean, in this, they're so similar that it feels like
Well,
they're, again, as with Falcon and Talon, they're sort of like there's a double pairing in a way that draws the attention, but it's not clear what the benefit of that is.
you both annoyingly and intelligently stole my point, which is that like I will do a very rare thing and both praise and agree with A.E. Stallings, but I think
Oh,
like
good. Yeah.
I mean I heard this from you, but like A.E. Stallings has this actually no, I heard it in her first Oxford lecture. She has this rule about rhyme, right? That one should attempt to rhyme words as far apart in linguistic nature together,
Yeah.
and pirouette and silhouette are too similar. They're
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
similar that that I don't know, like for me at least thinking about them, it almost feels like the poet is rubbing their hands. The poet has identified not only these words that are very conceptually close, but are also perfectly rhyming. And there's almost like, I don't know, again, this is not at all a character assassination on the poet, but there feels almost like a sense of glee in that similarity that doesn't come off. I'm less against Falcon and Talon than you. I think I'm more one by the conceptual rhyming than you are. Like the
Sure.
conceptual, I like the conceptual rhyming enough that I'm like, I can permit this. But yes, I totally agree with
Yeah.
pirouette and silhouette. I
Well,
mean,
and
on the
maybe
form,
the more important thing is to say like whether you like it or not, it calls attention. And so then
yes,
that is going to
yes,
have an effect, and
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah,
would be a positive or
yes,
negative. But I think you're right that part of what happens when we see silhouette and pirouette is not just that we recognize. By the way, totally unfairly, if this were a poem in French, that would not be a problem. Pirouette and silhouette.
really,
Well, no, I think not because they're both French words, right? And so in French,
yeah,
they wouldn't leap out the way they do in English. Both because in French, rhyme is not as salient a feature because you don't have stress the same way you do in English, but also because we're reading an English poem, and so we
mm,
really notice a French word leaping in. So when there are two French words,
mm,
and what would be
that's
the
true.
comparable problem would be if you it's sort of like there's certain when you're like studying a foreign language, you'll notice chunks of English get thrown in sometimes, and the chunks that tend to get thrown in are chunks from like business speak, right?
Yeah,
So when you have HR seminar thrown into the middle of a Spanish sentence, like you hear that American leaping in. I think you could do something similar in French where you'd have two especially American phrases being lumped in at the ends of the sentences, but at the ends of lines. Here, the Frenchness of them calls our attention, and
right.
fairly or not, makes us imagine the poet rather than being lost in the poem.
I remember, so I mean, I think in the last crit episode, Alice was like, I don't want to misquote Alice, so I'm going to paraphrase her while saying it might, this is not, maybe not quite what she said, but to my best of my memory, she said something along the lines of, if your poem isn't working in rhyme and meter, try and work it out in either prose or free verse and work out what you're saying and then apply rhyme and meter. And this is a fascinating idea for me because that's really not how I write poems. Like often what's great about rhyme and meter, especially rhyme, is not its musicality per se, but how it like conceptually can lead me, into interesting areas. I think I'm going to say this, and then in searching for rhymes, it turns out I actually say something completely different. And that is, the appropriate poem, as opposed to the poem I first arrogantly imagined. But my comment here is I'm not sure the sonnet is working, and whether that means whether that means W should adopt a different form or simply rewrite the sonnet is W's domain, not mine.
Yeah.
But I think that, okay, so I think formally the sonnet is too caging. It forces W into several conceptual constraints. Like, I don't know, I think it's about the first 12 lines, a continuous description in, if not the ecstatic register, then at least in the extremely impressed register that's always
Yeah,
building
it's
towards,
a beautiful dancer
yeah,
described in
yeah.
beautiful terms.
Throughout these 12 lines, we encounter rhetorical movements that become increasingly problematic. We have the rhyme of, we have a use of the rhyme of fate. We have her fate was now to turn and begin a pirouette. To me, that sentence is forced. Like the word
Yeah,
fate. And okay, so to take these lines also. She swirled, gleaming eyes aquarium like azure. I will note, but while I do think her fate was now to turn and begin a pirouette is, with the phrase her fate, a forced and awkward rhyme, the next line, she swirled, comma, gleaming eyes aquarium, is quite, I do love the elimination of syntax with gleaming eyes aquarium. I see it in a lot of rap music, and I can imagine that some might find it a little syntactically disorientating that, the poet has annihilated, any connective tissue in, you could say her gleaming eyes were like an aquarium or something. Her gleaming eyes like an aquarium were azure, whatever. But her
yeah,
gleaming eyes aquarium, I really like, and I recognize it. I
yeah.
recognize it from rap music,
I
but,
no,
you know,
I don't disagree, and I kind of assumed that aquarium was here being used implicitly as an adjective, like
right, yes,
like her
exactly.
gleaming eyes, blue, basically, or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But of course that which of course leaves the what comes after the line break, like Azure, is then unnecessary, and that often happens with
Yes.
we have line breaks that either are followed by the unnecessary or by the so necessary that they then just sort of disfigure the meaning.
Mm,
So, arms arched into a dome line break of fingers, which is again, it's confusing because I think what is meant is that the arms rise up in an arch, and then at the peak of the arch there is a dome made of
right,
fingers,
yes.
but into then is confusing, and the line break only accentuates that confusion. Similarly, the ballerina wore a suit of foam, white lace, so that we fully picture her wearing a suit of foam, whatever that looks like. And then we learn that the foam is there only to suggest whiteness. It jerks against the end of the line in a violent way, and it doesn't seem to me. I'm not sure what we gain by that misdirection. A
No,
loop,
I mean,
yeah,
sorry. I mean, I was going to say these two examples I think are pretty good actually, because I think they sort of outline our similarities and differences. In which in the first example, I totally agree with you. Like arms arched into a dome is descriptive enough that one can imagine it, and also sort of blunt enough that I don't know, it has a kind of graceful beauty in just being that little phrase. But of finger, is it? Yes, of fingers.
yeah,
I don't know. It feels like it's just there for syllabic value. And the
yeah.
specificity it adds is just confusing and unnecessary. I totally agree.
Though,
On the
though, though,
other,
though I'll add that of fingers as she fell in with her troop sounds lovely. And it sounds lovely partly because you
yes,
get the
no, it's
alliteration and
sonically
partly
great.
because of the way it distributes the stress, so that you have that, Nicholson Baker would approve of the first, third, and fifth feet are the
Mm.
only ones where we really hear the stress, and the other stress syllables are very, very muted.
Yeah, well,
That
it sounds like falling in with a troop, right? Like
Yeah,
it
no,
sounds like
it's
a
one. It's I mean,
soft to hard
it sounds
movement.
great,
Yeah.
and I would agree that although I don't I'm not thrilled by the use of aquarium as an adjective, and I think you don't need the like azure. The line she swirled, gleaming eyes, aquarium, I quite like, and I
Mm,
like partly because it has a sort of an athletic compression, and you even get the I can't remember what the term is for when you drop a one syllable of a foot in the middle of a line. She swirled, dropped syllable,
gleaming,
gleaming eyes,
gleaming
aquarium,
eyes.
right?
Yeah.
It's a catalectic. Is it catalectic, or is it? There's some
Mm.
other word for it. I forget. But
I don't know the word, but
yeah,
I know
there's
what
a
you're
little
talking
dropped
about. Yeah.
syllable there. But yeah, it's a
It's
trick
good.
that doesn't work all that often. But I like that line despite the trouble that surrounds it, I think.
Mm. And despite your hatred for sort of mimetic reading, I do like the little swirl that's created by the vortex of the lack of the unstressed syllable. What I was gonna say is that unlike you, and I guess I can,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
can W therefore
sure,
can
yeah,
choose whoever they
yeah, yeah,
respect aesthetically more. But unlike you, I do actually quite like the break on foam because I
right.
like the little acrobatic movement it performs from moving from an image of, a suit of pure foam to foam white lace. And like I actually agree with you that yes, like it's confusing in as much as we move from one, pure conceptual image to another. But like I actually love that movement. I love the slice between words. I love the ingenuity of the rhyme of foam white lace.
Yeah, yeah.
It was actually kind of great because when you sent me this file, for some reason the brown note didn't format it correctly, and one of the misformattings was it didn't put a break between foam white lace. So I
Oh,
kind of like I had to work out whether like that was intentional or if like the sonnet had broken on it, if there was
oh,
a rhyme that matched with dome, and I
right,
did,
right,
but
right.
like
Yeah, yeah,
it was
yeah.
fun. But I don't know, I kind of like that little bait and switch, that little movement, that little acrobatic somersault from a pure
Yeah.
suit of foam to a suit of foam white lace. But at the same
You know,
time,
a suit of
I
foam white
get this
lace
how it's disruptive.
is a great phrase, and so yeah, again,
Yeah.
I think the key there is not whether I like it or not, but rather that it creates a little moment of disorientation, or creates a little moment
Yeah.
of double meaning, or a second,
Yeah. Right, right,
that's
right.
worth being aware of. Similarly, I think
Yes.
like
Whether you want it.
there's a fair amount of language that feels like it's either slightly imprecise or slightly redundant. Into feels like
Yes.
not quite the right word, in that arms arched into a dome of fingers.
Mm.
Sequins of silver. The silver feels like it's almost fairly unnecessary. And there's sequins of particularly coming after sequins. Like sequins are shiny and kind of light colored, so we don't silver's not like a big surprise. Tulle a loop of tulle across her waist is just the wrong preposition. It should be around her waist, right? Particularly
Interesting.
if this is
I
a
didn't know
loop
that.
of tulle.
Yeah.
Across her waist is just one side, right? A flying gray falcon. You think like again, do we need to know that it's flying? Azure seems redundant.
I
In a poem about ballet that's a sonnet that is such a praise of form, you want the language to be really crisp and clear. And it's okay if it
right.
has little jogs and misdirections at times if they're productive, but it shouldn't be grammatically mushy
Is I think this is
or
line
redundant.
I think this is line 5, but you can correct me because it might be line 6, but the figure 8 slash broke and she
Yeah.
vaulted with her peerless silhouette. Peerless silhouette sounds nice. I mean, like it lovely, like quite nice sonic movement. And I mean, I think again, it's inherited this whole peerless is quite a well-used poetic term.
Yeah.
So we have the kind of whole weight of a kind of traditional resonance behind it. But at the same time, I think if you think about it for a while, it's kind of meaningless. Like her peerless silhouette, like her silhouette
Yeah.
that had no peers. That this seems, I don't know, it seems like it's substituting a kind of poetic commonality that's very easily recognized for actually meaningful description.
But it's funny. The word that leapt out more to me in that line was with, because it's a vague connector between
And
her
she vaulted
action
with her legs.
and this thing that she's taking with her, and it makes me wonder.
Mm.
Well, wait, what is meant here exactly? She vaulted with her peerless silhouette. She vaulted and her silhouette was peerless. Is that what's meant? And then it makes me think that what's meant is really just that we need some syllables and we need a rhyme sound.
So here's my first
Yeah, yeah, please.
formal suggestion.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
my first formal suggestion is why does this need to be 14 lines? Like, I don't know. I mean, obviously you want to write a sonnet, but like, let's move away from tradition for a second and just, if a sonnet, what happens if a sonnet is 10 lines? Like, what happens if you had to make this poem 10 lines long, which is, as I reformatting the structure of the sonnet, but cutting it a little bit, right? Because you have two quatrains and a couplet instead of three quatrains and a couplet. And like I honestly think this is dragged out from being overextended in its sort of documentary style observation of the progression of the conceptual movement. And I wonder if you had to eliminate a stanza, if you had to compress it, if you had to move from like, a perfectly, I'm not sure if this is perfectly timed, but if you had to move from like a timed camera movement to something more compressed, something less, true to the actual time of it, but maybe its own little poetic object of its own poetic time, what would you do if you had to do 10 lines instead of 14? What would you kill and what would you compress? That's my first big formal suggestion, I guess.
Yeah. I think the I was trying to think of poems or pieces of writing that came to mind when I read this, and there were three. Two were prose. One is the poem that came to mind was Leda and the Swan, the Yeats,
Yeah.
partly I guess because of the connection between the women and birds, but it sort of put pressure on. I think part of the difficulty that W gets into with this poem is that the first 12 lines, there is a real hard break between the first 12 lines and the last two. No pun intended, but I think it intended by W. Like it is deliberate, but we'll get to that. But I think in an odd way, the sort of the fundamental question of the poem in the first 12 lines is, can I describe this beautiful dancer with sufficient beauty? That there's just he sort of puts himself the raw challenge of really dazzlingly describing. And in a way, it feels as if he might get into less trouble if he didn't try as hard just to show off his poetic ability to describe, and maybe addressed a little more directly the thing he's really interested in. Because I don't know whether he should compress or expand this poem, but the question for me is what do you really care about here? Where is
Yeah.
the thing where's the tender heart of this poem that you can't let go of? And the suggestion at the end of the poem is that it may be something a little bit different from what we've been led to believe. Her falling legs fracture left the gallery soundless at time's hushing fragility. So there is something about, I think, time's hushing fragility points in the direction of something that seems really to matter to
Mm.
him, but it points there vaguely and in a rush at the end in a way that I'm not really sure. I believe there's something there, and I believe I have some notion of what it might be, but it's actually quite hard to nail it down. The two other works that came to mind were about a performance in front of a crowd. One is a Baudelaire prose poem called A Heroic Death, which is sort of typically Baudelairean in its sadism. It's about a theatrical performer, and the setting suggests it's sort of like this is theater as like acting, but also singing and dancing all at once. And he's convicted of treason, but then the prince has him perform. He's the greatest actor of his time, the greatest performer of his time, and the prince has him perform. And then at the height of his performance, and he's acting his heart out. He's never done a better job. It's the entire audience is rapt. They're enchanted by his performance, and even by the knowledge that he should be dead, but the prince has somehow spared him to do this work. And then at the peak of his performance, the prince sends this little boy up to the edge of the stage, and the little boy hisses at him. And then in the convention of the time, this is a hiss is like a boo. It's like
Mm.
like you suck. And this
Right.
hiss, the line he says, had the hiss swift as a sword. Oh, sorry. The the line, from that part of the hall whence this unexpected rebuff had come, the guy hisses, a child darted out into a corridor with a stifled laugh. Fanciul, the name of the performer, awakened from his dream, closed his eyes, and when almost at once he opened them again, they seemed to have grown inordinately large. Then he opened his mouth as though struggling for breath, staggered forward a step, then backward, and fell dead upon the stage. So this hiss at the peak of his great
Oh, that's
performance
good.
kills him. The other
Yeah.
very short piece that came to mind was the little Hemingway vignette that begins the first matador got the horn, and it describes a matador. There's a bullfight where the first two matadors quickly get wounded and have to be taken off, and so the last matador, the third one, has to kill five bulls in a row. And at the beginning, the whole audience is laughing at the maiming of the first matador. The first matador gets his hand impaled, and the audience is hooting and laughing at him, and they're jeering at the second matador. And then by the time the third one is gotten to his fifth bull, he's so weak he can barely lift his arm. But he finally drives the sword in, and they all erupt in ecstasy, and they're throwing flowers down on him. And so the character that changes over the course of that little vignette is the audience, is the crowd. You realize they're really the main character of the story. And both of those came to mind here because it felt like they're sort of leaning on similar questions that are hinted at in this sort of clumsy last couplet. But it seems to me that I think you're right, that something about the sonnet form has really forced him into shapes that don't seem to be serving the interest of the poem. I thought there's a different version. There's a parallel universe version of this that would be as something as minimal as a triolet, right? A little
Yeah,
teeny,
yeah.
teeny, repetitive, perfect little pristine form. I could also see a version of this that's a ballad. Like part of the reason that ballads are often used for storytelling is that the rhymes don't come as frequently, and the meter allows for a fair amount of looseness in those little 4 and 3 syllable lines, so that you can they can be pretty folksy, they can be pretty talky, and it can allow you to get through some narrative, and they can also go on as long as you need them to go on. So I could see a
Right.
couple different versions of this, but they did. The question for me was, what do you really care about here? Because I think
Yeah.
right now you sort of rush through the thing at the end that seems to matter to you, and in the main part of the poem, the first 12 lines, it seems like you've just put yourself to the challenge of having to describe really awesomely, and that seems like that's a losing proposition for any poet.
Okay, well, that was slightly too interesting a discussion because it gave me too many ideas. But yeah, I mean, I want to read that Baudelaire thing. So if I
I'll
have read
send it
it,
to you. I have. Oh shoot! Actually, I'll have to find a version I can send you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay, yeah. Well, I can also find it. But yeah, thank you. I mean, that sounds. I don't know if you read. I don't know if Baudelaire read Heinrich von Kleist. I don't know how popular Kleist was by the 19th century, but sounds like one of my favorite one of my sort of pet obsessions is an essay by the much underrated genius Heinrich von Kleist called On the Marionette Theatre, which
Hmm.
basically, I mean, I won't get into it too much, but like its basic proposition is something along the lines of grace, inherent divine grace, is achieved by the God that knows so much that its self-consciousness is annihilated by the amount of its knowledge, or by the puppet that knows so little that it has no self-consciousness. And the sort of the human, the fallen, and I mean fallen in the Christian sense, but the fallen human, resides between these two extremes and has self-consciousness and therefore cannot attain the grace that comes with a lack of self-consciousness, either through like over fulfillment or under fulfillment. And it sounds vaguely like that may have influenced the Baudelaire prose poem, but who knows? I mean, I think.
This definitely must have influenced Ligotti too.
Oh, for sure,
He talks about
yes, no,
puppets
definitely.
both in his
Yeah,
great
yeah, yeah.
story and in the conspiracy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Oh
no,
no,
I'll have to read that. Yeah, yeah.
me and Legatti have like a very shared obsession with the puppet. But yeah, but this, I mean, yes. So the problem with this sonnet is, I think, the conceptual problem is multifold. So, to the best of my knowledge, from what I can see, it does not involve at all a mention in terms of literal writing of an I. It doesn't have an I. But of course, it's an observational lyric. And A being a lyric and B being observational, it implies, the consciousness of the speaker.
The gallery seems to be the only suggestion of that. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
But it's also unclear because the suggestion is that the break leaves the gallery soundless. But then that makes me wonder: were they making sound before this, or weren't they silent the whole time?
right.
Yeah,
So the focus of the focus of the speaker is completely on the object, right? The ballerina for
yeah,
the first 12 lines. And then we have a kind of concept and the focus is purely kind of conceptual rapture, right? It's a
yeah,
rapturous praising of the speaker. Oh, sorry, of the ballerina that
yeah,
only recognizes the speaker in as much as they are absent or as much as they are simply a praising machine.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it, and the final two lines, the final couplet, her fooling, I'll repeat it one more time. Her fooling legs fracture left the gallery soundless, at times hushed fragility.
hushing fragility.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, hushing fragility. It introduces too many elements. Brings the speaker or at least the gallery, which is, the implied context of the speaker into literal viewing, while simultaneously, it places a recognition of audience, of observation. It places that recognition as inherently spurred on by, a break in the music, right? The rhapsody is damaged by her leg breaking, and the speaker, or the audience that at least contains the speaker, enters into the poem.
I mean, I think he's
Yeah.
bringing in a lot of concerns that what this suggests to me is that maybe these concerns could have come up earlier. That there's
Right, right, right. It's a
the
meaning
poem
time.
doesn't have the axle of the wheel is not placed at the center.
Yes, yeah, oh, yeah. So it's again like it's the problem of the sonnet. The final couplet demands a change, and like who knows whether like W decided on the change and want and like always ultimately ended headed for that, or if like they only brought in the change because of the constraint of the final couplet. Who knows? I don't know that. I mean, who only W knows that. But like the movement is too abrupt and yet not abrupt enough. It's linguistically too similar, so it feels, faint linguistically, too close to the intense description. There's no sort of linguistic falling off. There's not like the starkness of a breaking leg. In some ways, it's too gauzy to really be describing, the brutality of a leg breaking. There's no violence in it. It's just
Yeah,
more sort of gauzy, luxuriant description. The rhyme again is like
yeah.
too weak,
The
too
rhyme's very
gauzy.
very distant. Yeah,
And then we have this kind of maybe not moral, but this kind of conceptual payload, right? So
yeah.
the leg breaks in line 14, her legs
But the,
fracture.
mo- the yeah the most abstract line of the poem is the last one. My formula I use when I'm talking to fiction writers is force equals mass times acceleration, which is a formula in physics. And
Hmm.
if force is sort of the aesthetic effect of the story, then acceleration is the motion of the plot, and mass is the weight of the characters. And so we
Yeah.
care about something, and it's moving, and both of
Hmm.
those things have to be in place in order for it to have an impact on us. And so I think you want to load up the poem, the pieces of the poem with your care. You want to let us know where we should invest our care, and then show us something happening to that investment. But it's hard to
Yeah.
ask us to make that investment right at the end. The other
Hmm.
metaphor I'll use is like tapping the blocks in a Jenga tower, right? So you'd see which one is the tight. You may not have Jenga in England, but it's
I've
a
heard of it.
it's a stupid game where you stack wooden blocks and in rows of three, and they're in crosshatch, and then you have
Yeah.
to remove a block every turn and stack it on the top. And so what you do is you have to tap basically individual blocks to see which one is loose, and some of them are rock solid because they're load bearing. And so you can do that with a piece of writing, and you kind of tap to identify, like, oh no, if I were to remove this line, I would have no more investment in the poem. And as a writer, that tells you, like, well, this is what you care about. Because right now
Right.
it feels on the one hand like you're trying to do a balletic move here in the first 12 lines, and then make an abstract declaration in the couplet.
Yeah, well, so yeah, you're moving conceptually right from this rapturous description to this sort of final, and I think the other problem is that like it's completely packed into the final line, right? So L13 is basically devoted to description of a physical movement again, right? The breaking of a leg, and it's a legs fracture left the gallery slash soundless, at times hushing fragility. So every like almost the entire, and to some extent it does feel like a kind of moral comment, maybe not a moral comment, but like a comment about the nature of reality, right? Times hushing fragility. I'm not really sure what the comment is. I'm not really sure what times hushing fragility means. And I think that's not a problem. I just don't like the line doesn't land because whatever kind of impact it wants to make, it doesn't. I want to add actually to your description of what, kind of motion, movement in fiction. One of the things I think formal poetry does, and I don't like the term formal, but poetry in rhyme meter does the best, is that it's a perfect machine for landing punchlines. David, what's it called? What's his name? Is it David Lim? Oh no, good guy. Oh, David Yezi. Sorry, David Yezi has a great essay. David Yezi, the poet of terrible blindness, but quite a good essay.
I was going to say, I feel like his reputation on the show is built, for his reputation in your mind is built on one poem he wrote where he badly, treated a blind character. But yeah,
I mean, I've read his
understandably.
I've read his other poems.
I can. Yeah,
I've read his other poems, but they just feel like kind of knockoff derivative versions of oh God, who's the guy who wrote 19 North? I love that guy. I love that poem. Yeah, exactly. They
How
feel
do you
like
made that connection?
knockoff
I do think that there's
versions of
Jarrell there.
poems.
I think he's got some pretty. I think he writes well about like moral failures of like comfortable middle-aged men. I mean, like he has the Good News or The Chain. I think are like poems that are. I mean, like Alan Shapiro or C.K. Williams at his best, or Anthony Hecht. I think he does a good job of casting a cold eye on his own life. But you're right. His track record of writing about blind people is that's a weak one. But I think you're referring to his essay about poetry and jokes, which is a terrific essay.
Yes. Sorry, I take your authority being full. I did love your definition of me as Loki earlier on the podcast. I really appreciate it. But I'll take your sort of for-like authority. But no, yes, exactly. His essay, Poetry and Jokes, is like one of my favorite. Well, really a great essay. I love that essay. So there you go. Let me be slightly tricksterish in my praise of something by him. But no, he has a great essay, Poetry and Jokes, and he talks a bit about that and about the punchline. And one of the things poetry and rhyme meter is really sort of in its blood good at doing is whether this is an image or a comment, it's really good at building up to a final kind of shattering blow of the hammer, right? This kind of doesn't even have to be a revelation, but like this final blow of the poem that has been built up in the musical schema by both the metric on the syllabic level, but also on the rhyme, on the general sort of conceptual schematic level. And I think this poem seems conflicted because it kind of wants to do it. The 14th line is, the pure conceptual answer, soundless at times hushed fragility. And yet, in terms of rhyme, it completely fails to deliver that blow in a hard-hitting manner. There's no sort of convincing sound to it because it's a half rhyme. It's a half feminine rhyme with gallery.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I guess again,
it's not quite feminine. I think the argument would be that the true
Alexandrine.
rhyme is re and t. But those are they're so weakly stressed, those final syllables, that we hear it as a kind of a triple syllable rhyme, and it's a very odd effect.
I think
part of the trouble of this poem is just that it's a good idea for a poem.
Well, exactly. No, I agree. Like in some ways, the concept is slightly too good, right? Like it's. What is, I mean, I do actually agree with what Keats says when the poem has designs upon us. And obviously this poem doesn't have, moral designs.
Poem's
like,
not,
it's not like a Palestine anti-genocide poem.
No.
But in its movement, I feel like it has designs upon us. You know what I mean? Like I'm watching and being like, oh yes, I see where you're going. You know what I mean? Like,
but this is why I think formal poetry is harder. It makes it harder. I think this is why form makes it harder to hide failure, because in a confusing free verse poem, it's easier to like you might say like, well, this isn't good, but I also can't tell what you were going for. And so one of the vulnerabilities of writing in form is that it makes it easier to see what you were going for when you slightly fail to make it. So I think that's always
right. For sure.
That's always a risk. So let's read As My Grays Come In by D. There's a lady down in Georgia who, I'd guess, has always worn a single braid. She dropped us at the river, where we threw ourselves in tubes, all young and not afraid. I kept on thinking how her silver strands washed out and in so perfectly around and down her backbone, how the rocks demand the water's flow respect their form, resound both when it meets and as it leaves. She's still a graven image in my mind. I bet if she'd have faced this log, she'd have the skill I don't, to swim around. Forgive, forget, but age without due wisdom gets no crown. She could be just like me here, as I drown.
I really like this one. I actually have, I think, two to three criticisms of it, but out of the three poems we got, I think this one is the most perfected.
Yeah, I have mostly very annoying line level criticisms of this one, but I am interested in it as a I am interested in its motion. But yeah, give us
Yeah.
do you want to say a word about the form first?
Oh, it's an English sonnet, right? Sorry, let
Yeah,
me.
all I think they're all true rhymes except for strands and demand. Uh,
Who braid through? Sorry, I'm just going line by line.
yeah.
Who braid through afraid, strands around, demand resound. That might you might want to. Yeah, that's lines 5 to 8. I think are a little rhymingly close. You might want to
Yeah,
differentiate.
the vowel in D.
Yes,
Yeah.
you might want to differentiate 5 to 7 to 6 to 8. Yes.
Right, around and resound versus strands and demand. So there's a slant rhyme, or there's an off rhyme, strands and demand, and then yeah, you're right, they are close. There's
Yeah,
not
I
enough
mean the
contrast
problem.
between the paired rhymes. Yeah,
Well, yeah, the problem with doing slant rhymes is if you're going to do slant rhymes, you don't want to confuse them with other slant rhymes. And if
right.
you're going to do
Yeah.
slant rhymes here, then you're sonically confusing because you could
Yeah.
slant rhyme 5 to 6 and 7 to 8,
Yeah.
like or 5 to 7. It's complicated.
Yeah. Well, I have another thought, but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, still bet, skill, forget. Okay, so my general okay, here's my big comment. And we can say if it's wrong or right. I think you should cut 13 and 14. I will go on, I'll be the formalist gremlin and say I think this poem is better as 12 lines than 14 lines. And I don't think the final couplet works.
Yeah, I don't know that I disagree. I have a few other related thoughts, but I think
Yeah.
my instinct is broadly in that direction. I think the meter for the most part didn't. I'm trying to think. I don't think I really snagged on it.
I know I like the
I think the
meter. I
meter
mean the
was pretty effective.
The first line is headless and the second line isn't, but I don't think that's a problem. I think I like slightly struggled against it when I was reading
Yeah, that
very
is tricky.
intensely,
Right?
but
Yeah. Well, because
I don't think it's a
y-
problem.
it's headless, but it's also headless without it's a headless trochee, which is a little trickier because it then means it's an it makes us want to read that first foot as an anapest. There's a
Oh, I
lady
see.
down in
Yeah,
Georgia
there's a
who, which
lady
makes it a
down.
4 foot line, right? I guess there's a lady down in Georgia who,
Yeah,
but
that seems like a quite
that's
suspicious anapath to
it's a little
me.
tricky. It's either headless if you give the there a good hard stress, but I guess my ear doesn't want to. So yeah, that one's a little
I don't know.
that one's
I
maybe
feel like
a foot short, but you could argue about it one way or the other. There weren't
I feel like
places I don't think where
as
I tripped
metrical.
on the meter.
No, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like I feel as metrical poets, like well, obviously we're like slightly hyper autistic to this shit, but I honestly no. I think the meat is pretty smooth, pretty good. Like
Yeah.
I
I didn't get
guess that's
snagged. I
always
didn't get into
one.
trouble. There's a nice little
Yeah.
note in I'm the episode coming out probably tomorrow. I need to record the intro tonight. With Derek Mong about the anthologist, the Nichols and Baker novel, and he has a little moment in that where
Oh,
he
the bad Dickinson guy, the guy who wrote a terrible essay about Dickinson.
did he write about Dickinson?
Yeah, he wrote a terrible essay where he was like, "I'm teaching boys Dickinson," and then like
Oh,
gave some cliched
like,
quotes and
oh,
was
you're
like,
talking
"But
about
the
Derek
boys
Long.
are
You had, yeah,
amazing."
because he talked about Dickinson, and this is like the Yezi thing. Like you
Yeah,
quarreled with him on this one thing, and then he's doomed forever.
he's tarnished. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I had a whole other episode with him, but yeah, yeah, I think I had a lot of fun with talking with him about this novel. We mostly talked about meter, but
Interesting.
there's a moment I kind of appreciate in Baker's novel where he says he's speaking directly to the reader.
So,
The
sorry,
whole thing's
sorry.
a
Wait,
monologue.
what novel is this? Sorry, I don't
The
think you
Anthologist.
said.
But Baker has this little moment where he says people who say 19th century look down on people who say 1800s. He says like it's not fair. They mean the same thing, but like you should know if you're a person who says 1800s that the people who say 19th century are quietly back in the back of their minds looking down on you. It's just this sort of like observation about
Interesting.
sociology. So I will just note here that
I'm just gonna go to the toilet. So just like keep talking, but I wanted to interrupt you
oh
so
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
like
I'll
interrupt me.
so
But sorry, go on.
yeah. So but I'll just make a note here to say that there's a wide variety of or there's a wide range of tolerance for slant rhyme that different poets have and different readers have, and all of that's fine. And people disagree, and particularly the Brits tend to have a. I think in America it tends to be more of a hard line between form and free verse, and the British seem to play with free form a little more loosely and with a little less fussiness than the Americans who bother to write in form at all do. But there are people who have a special dislike of a rhyme that of rhyming a word that ends with an S with another word that does not end with an S. Specifically, that particular pairing, strands with demand, it's very, very close. Most people don't even think of it as being a slant rhyme. They think of it as just being a rhyme. But just so that you know, there is a small group of snobs out there who have a special disdain for that particular slant rhyme, rhyming a word that ends with an S with a word that does not end with an S. That is just fair or not, it exists, it is out there. These tend to be people who believe in the kind of slant rhyme that Dickinson tended to use, which is to say consonant slant rhyme, where the concluding consonant sounds are exactly the same, but the vowel sounds are different. That tends
Right.
to be the rule among a certain stripe of formal snobs. But just so you know, I think there aren't really any more people who there used to be people who and Alexander Pope was big on this, who really disliked rhyming a liquid U with a long U.
Example, French.
So, and it comes up more in because Americans drop a lot of liquid U's, but they
Uh-huh.
exist more for Brits and Aussies and others. So like tune with moon, right? Tune is a liquid U. Americans would mostly just say
Yes.
tune, like we're saying TOON.
Yeah.
Um, but traditionally, the word's pronounced tune, and a lot of people still pronounce it tune. And there are some people who used to be real fussy about rhyming a liquid U with a long U. That's a liquid U, the yoon versus oon,
Wait,
right?
wait. They were fussy about rhyming. What? Who are these creatures? What?
This is something I remember hearing in
What?
grad school. This is also people who are real fussy about, and this one I have a little more sympathy with, people who are fussy about rhyming voiced with unvoiced consonants.
What? Give me an
So
example. I like Walker. I kind of understand when I hear it, but in conceptual matters, I'm just
yeah,
like a
yeah, yeah, yeah.
complete primitive.
Cease with trees,
Oh, okay.
right? Trees, the z is voiced.
Yeah.
Trees,
Right, right, right.
cease is unvoiced.
Cease. Yeah. Well, that makes more sense than the sorry, tune moon bullshit. Okay. What the fuck is that about? Okay, I see the point with trees and cease, even if I don't agree with it. But
Sure,
okay.
yeah. Just making you aware. But the one that like that sort of like the there's like a special neon light that lights up in the heads of certain snobs when they see a word ending with an S rhymed with a word not ending with an S. Just so you know.
Oof.
And I
Oof.
confess that one of those people may be me, but it's not
Oh,
I don't choose to have that feeling. I just know that, and there are plenty of poems
okay.
that I like, even poems I published that do have that pairing. There's just a part of
You're
me that feels a little bit of a flicker.
you're like the
And I could never do it in one of my own poems, right?
you're like sort of the progressive's dream of like sort of a liberal guy who's like worked out that he is like white privilege, like you're sort of you recognize that it's wrong and yet you still dislike it, so the correct the if this was about race, the progressives would love you.
Right.
But
I'm like a liberal Catholic who says abortion's wrong, but I think it should be legal, right? Which is like
yeah, I
not
feel that.
I was gonna say that's not what I think. But but when it
No,
comes to
that's not
form,
not
I
what
think
I think either.
like
Yeah.
matching an S with a non-S is perfectly fine, only not in my head.
Okay, well, I'll defend D and say D,
Sure.
in my head, S's and non-S's are perfectly fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a craving for the D. I love it. Um, sorry.
Perfect. All right.
Uh,
And yeah, so the rhyme, the meter, and then the motion of the poem. And your argument is you don't really need the concluding couplet here. If the concluding couplet in the ballerina was a little bit of a non sequitur, the concluding couplet here feels like perhaps redundant. Um,
okay, well, yeah, well, like I feel like this has not the opposite problem, but the opposite in terms of success from the ballerina sonnet, in that like it has wonderful conceptual movement. Sorry, I'm slowing myself down by reading it. Sorry. But there's a lady. Okay, I'm going to read it out, and every time there's a conceptual movement, I'll stop. But there's a lady down in Georgia who, I'd guess, has always worn a single braid. She has dropped us. Okay, conceptual movement A. The lady down in Georgia, who's A, presumably long, given the input of the title, and B, has worn a single long braid. Okay, she has dropped. Sorry. She has dropped us at the where's that at? Yeah, sorry. She has dropped us at the river where we threw ourselves in tubes, all young and not afraid. I think, in honesty, I mean, like, if it wasn't in quotes, it'd probably be fine. But the quotation marks around "not afraid" are pretty great. I quite like that, and I think it provides a pretty great rhyme. I kept on thinking how her silver strands washed out and in so perfectly around and down her backbone. How the rocks demand. Oh, sorry, down her backbone. So here you go. Like this is not alien conceptual movement, right? But it's certainly a conceptual return to her hair, and it's a pretty nice. Sorry, I just want to read out the perfect line. Okay. I kept on thinking how her silver strands washed out and in and perfectly around and down her backbone. That's a lovely, I mean, that's just a lovely description, and like it's just lovely metrically. I'm trying to work out. No, there's no, I guess if you were extremely paranoid, you could say washed out is a spondy. But apart from that, and so perfectly around and down her backbone, it's just a lovely series of I ams, ended on an unstressed syllable, but I think it's just a lovely little knot of perfect conversational music. You know what I mean? Like there's no big sonic effects going on here. It's just a lovely little set of I ams that perfectly do the thing they're describing. It's a perfect bit of mimesis. Um, Conceptual movement. How the rocks demand, the waters flow, respect their form, resound both when it meets and as it leaves. Okay, so we've moved. There's a little beautiful conceptual movement here. We've moved from her hair, falling in a little perfect image down her back, to the movement of water obeying the form of rocks. And like there's no, I don't know, like there's no logical explanation. There doesn't need to be, because the logic of the image works well. So A, like the compression here is pretty great. B, the movement is nice because it's unexpected. We don't expect D to move from, or the narrator of D's poem to move from the hair to what happens next. But he does, and it's pretty beautiful. Maybe this would be a good time to respond because my machine's
yeah.
slightly fucking up. So let me just
Yeah. No, I do appreciate that shift from one image to another parallel image, the hair to the water,
Right.
and the question of that as not just an existing parallel shape, but maybe a kind of relationship or a kind of symbiosis. There's this respect and there's this tension between these two forces. I, I will note that I think Shane has called attention to it, and it has certainly been in my
Uh-huh.
mind for, since I was in college, that it is a very common and ready formula in a lot of poetry that picks up clauses beginning with how in anaphoric sequence. How
That's
the
true.
blah does the blah, how the blank does the blank, how the X does the Z. And I think that can be wonderful, but it is done a whole lot, and it also can sometimes be. I think here it is that there is a genuine parallel structure between the two, and a convincing one. And it's not as if the poem ends with a peroration of that anaphora, but it's something just to keep an eye on. So I think here it's perfectly
Yes.
fine, but it is a tendency. It is very easy to slip into doing that in a lot of poems if you're not careful,
Oh, I
particularly
totally.
building up to just do ending a poem with a long list of hows.
Right, right, right. No, yes, that's great. Yeah, no, but I'm glad you
Yeah,
spotted that
but
because
that's
I
not
didn't, and I
what
think
D
that's
does
very
here.
true.
D sort of uses it for a moment and then moves out of it.
Yes, yes, D does this slightly overused practice quite well. But yes, no, totally. And I also like how D begins the howl on the sixth syllable. So the iambic stress of the line. I think that's pretty well done because D has a pretty effective stop, a grammatical stop. I is what is a I totally forget the term for a grammatical stop in the middle of a line. If there is a line,
C-
if there is a
a
term.
caesura?
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
D has a pretty good caesura on backbone. Backbone, full stop, new sentence, how, the rocks demand, new line.
And
That's
we should
pretty
say that
good.
that is also we were giving W grief for breaking feet in the middle with a caesura, and the key here is that the meter is very confident. So
Yes.
we're not left wondering how to scan these feet.
No, I
That
mean, we're never outlining a rule. We're never
Yeah,
outlining
yeah,
a
yeah.
hard and
There are
fast
no
rule you
rules. It's
can
a question of
break.
like what effect does it have? And
Yes, there
here
is.
we feel very confident about how the line about how
Yes.
to pronounce the line and what kind of metrical space the line picks up. Sometimes it's possible to break up a foot with a caesura in a way that leaves the ear a little bit lost as to how to proceed.
Exactly. Yeah, you're dealing with strictures, and if you're going to break the strictures, then you better be fucking good at breaking the strictures. Because if you break the strictures and you're bad, then you're just breaking strictures meaninglessly and musically incoherently. So if you're going to break strictures, then you better do it in a musically interesting and coherent way. And I think D does that in a way that W
We don't need to beat up on
doesn't in
W
that
anymore.
summer.
But
Yeah, yeah,
I was
no,
trying to
no, I
because
like
I also
W,
like
but yes.
I was recognized like it's possible to hear us make some offhand comments like, well, wait a minute, you said the opposite of that 10 minutes ago.
No, everything is
Yeah,
context dependent, of
yeah,
course.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, let me keep going.
yeah, yeah.
So
Please.
I'll start from how the rocks demand slash the waters flow, respect their form, resound, both when it meets and as it leaves. She's still a graven image in my mind. Okay, we'll stop there. So like this is I really like this little, I guess I would call it a triplet. It's about 3 lines. It's like yeah. I mean, as you say, how is a maybe as Shane's as you get from Shane, how is a slightly cliched way to move syntactically on in through like revelatory instances, but I think it really works here. Let me write. So around, demand, resound. Oh, strands around,
Yes, still
demand,
is the beginning of
resound.
a new
Yes, yes,
quatrain.
yes, 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 yes. Okay. Yes, no, I really like this little quatrain. I like this little conceptual movement. I think it's striking in that like it's an introduction of a new conceptual element, right? We move from she dropped us at the river where we threw ourselves in tubes, all young and not afraid. So it moves from, activity, adolescence, movement, and then and it moves to like, the movement of her hair, right? So we have this perfect little image, and then it expands. It takes this little image and it moves adjacently at an almost right angle to it. It expands outward to discuss, the movement of water, around, rocks, around shapes, around form. And at the same time, it's quite formally well made. It's a little perfect piece of music. And I just think like this very subtle, it's not in your face. It's not what some would say is my understanding of vortexes in language, which I think my understanding of vortexes in language is slightly bigger and slightly less, violent and powerful than some people think it is. But like in my opinion, this is a little vortex of music, a little conceptual vortex, a little sort of sidestep that works perfectly within the structure of the poem. If you don't have anything to say, I'll move on. But if you do,
No, yeah, I mean, I have annoying things to say because I do,
okay,
generally
go on. Be
speaking, I think
annoying.
I share your sentiment. Some of this is, I think, a matter of perspective. I mean, I
Yeah,
recognize this very much. Like I've done this. I've gone tubing on a river in Georgia. I mean, I grew up
interesting.
there, and
Okay.
so like this is very familiar to me. And so for whatever it's worth, when I hear certain constructions, I get self-conscious about my own provincialism. So
Okay.
like I was in a meeting like over Zoom with a client a while ago, and they're all in New York. There was a bunch of them in a room in New York, and I was giving a little spiel, and it was going well. And then in the last sentence of my spiel, I was referring to them and something they had asked for that I'd provided, and I said y'all, and I could just feel that it was wrong. You just feel like, oh fuck, like th- this was not a setting in which that was going to be appealing or cute. And I wasn't even saying it in a self-conscious progressive way because it's an inclusive pronoun. I was saying
Right.
it because I'm from the South. And I could
Uh-huh.
just
So it's
feel in that moment
automatic.
it was like a corny, hokey, hillbilly moment for them. Like
Uh-huh.
it made me less credible. And so I can't help but when I hear construction like all young and not afraid, that thrown in all is a very familiar construction. I recognize that is it may be true that all of the people going into the river were young, but that all young as a it's the way like Southern people will sometimes throw little in, like Mexicans will often add a diminutive, ita, in a way that is not really descriptive. It's just sort of a tick of the tongue speaking, and little or
Uh-huh.
all will get thrown in by Southerners. I kept on thinking that similarly, as there's something about the unnecessary inclusion of that I feel like, yee, you sound like, uh-oh. Like I would worry in my own poems about the appearance of these little construction, these little
Wait.
ticks.
The unnecessary inclusion of that in which line?
I kept on thinking how her silver strands, part of it is filling out the meter there, but kept thinking is what is the way you would say that. You would say, I thought about how her silver strands, or I kept thinking about how her silver strands, but the elision of
Interesting.
about and the
Okay.
inclusion of on to my ear sounds very Southern.
I
There's a
kept
lady
thinking
down in
on.
Georgia, and I can't. I mean, again, I can't even hear down in Georgia without hearing the devil went down to Georgia. So again, part of it is like because I'm from Georgia, because I'm from the South, I hear in this things that light up, that set my hackles on edge, like set me on edge in a way that probably wouldn't for most people. So I should say that that's like when I'm reading this, I'm reading it also with an eye to my own guarding of my provincialism against the contempt that I expect from Northerners.
Okay. Well,
So you
okay.
should
So
take that all of that with that grain of salt. But like that is a thought I had reading, especially the first half of this poem. I have some other thoughts just about the precision of the construction and the description
okay.
throughout. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, before we go into that, like, I guess my question is, if you, like, I know, like down in Georgia definitely is, like it's trying to symbolize some kind of, locational linguistic movement, right? Like it's demonstrating a certain location. But I get my question is, I'm definitely not going to disagree with these things you've pointed out, but like, why would you point them out as a problem per se?
Well,
Like if it's if
but
it's
I'm
taking
not.
this dialect, what's problematic about it?
Well, no, it's, I mean, well, partly because I don't, it's not clear to me that the poem is intending to be in this dialect.
Okay.
Because, I mean, I
Okay.
think like if this were a poem that was clearly written in a voice, if this were a poem written, spoken by that lady, I would,
Yeah.
I wouldn't mention this at all because it would simply seem consistent with the voice. I'm mentioning it because I don't know if Dee is aware of it.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I don't
Okay. Okay.
actually know
Right.
where Dee is from. Dee may be from California for all I know. But it is the thought, so I'm not even pointing it out as a problem. I'm pointing it out as something I recognize in the same way that I think like my guess is that if some of your friends from back home were to, come to, certain kinds of events in London or in Oxford, there are things they would say or that they might let slip that would be
Right.
that you would be more
Yes.
self-conscious about than anyone else would there.
Yeah. 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 Okay.
So
Yes. So it.
it's a little bit of that, just like that I noticed those things. They
Right.
read in a certain way to me that may be perfectly fine, but it feels a little bit like a colloquial Southern construction in the voice of the
Yeah.
poem, not just of this lady. Um,
And it feels accidental in as much as
well,
it's not
I
intended to be like a
I don't know.
program.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like the poem is trying to make a point about being
Right.
in a Southern voice, and it doesn't need to make that point. I mean, again, like, none of this is really a judgment; it's an observation,
Okay.
and it's all
Okay.
as much an observation about my own tendency to respond as anything else, as with the the S and the
Right.
non-S. I do have some sort of like annoying technical questions about just like the visual descriptions and some of the constructions that feel to me
Okay.
like, yeah, I just sort of
No, go
wanted to
ahead.
like
It's your time
tighten,
to
I
be
wanted to like
annoying.
tighten the screws on some of these moments.
Okay.
So
Okay. Tie in the screws. Go on.
yeah, so like there's a lady down in Georgia who is, I mean, it's a heavy enjambment to end the first line on. I mean, it's not a heavy
Right.
enjambment because you do have you have a piece of punctuation there, so there is a pause there, but it's a real dangling promise of something, and we're sort of waiting for like, oh, who is she? This is going to be a real revelation? And then the revelation is, I guess, has always worn a single braid, which then leaves me with more questions than I had before. Like,
Yeah.
I guess she'd always worn a single, like, and it's not only, it's not, this is not when we were going on a ride to the river, I saw this lady and I'm guessing she had always worn a single braid. This is she is down there now. And I'm guessing
Mm.
she has always worn a single braid. Why am I guessing that? Well, I think later I gather that I kept on thinking how her silver strands washed out. Now, again, like when we finally do orient ourselves, I do get the image, I think, which is that you're sitting in the back of the van, you're watching her driving, you're looking at her hair run, down I mean, as much as you can see it, maybe you're sitting kind of to the side of her, but you're watching her, or, gray hair down her back and thinking about how it moves. But, but again, like we don't know, we know that she dropped us at the river and then we see her silver strands, not a, as a, there was some poet in my graduate program who loved to use the word hank to describe hair, a hank of hair. We're not looking at like a big heavy hank, a rope of hair. We're looking at individual strands washed out. And so the immediate image that comes to mind is that she's in the river with us. And then I have to
Yeah.
reorient in, washed out and in so perfectly around. I still don't know that that's not her in the river, around and down her backbone. I still don't know that that's not her in the river until I start to figure out like, oh, she's thinking back to, or he's thinking, I actually don't know.
Yeah.
Even though I remember the name, I don't actually remember what
Shit.
gender this person is. But either way,
Right.
it is. If I then try to go back to the second line, I'd guess she's always worn a single braid. Then what I'm thinking is, so the reason you think she's always worn a single braid, it's not just that she was wearing a single braid. She has always worn a single braid. I'm assuming that's because the shape of her hair, she was not wearing her hair in a braid, but the shape of it suggested a braid. Like it was like
Yeah.
wavy in the shape of a braid, which of course makes me think of my daughters who braid their hair and then unbraid it. And then it is wavy, but it's not wavy in and out in a single focused way like a river or down the backbone. It's wavy and spread out all in all directions. So
It's not
it,
suggestible
it's an
braid. Okay.
yeah. It's like it asks me to follow a kind of description, but then it's actually quite difficult to understand precisely what is described. Again, I can gather how some of the associations come together. If I don't bother to try to imagine it, I can follow the language. The voice is very confident and very convincing. And I very much share Cameron's broader sentiment, but I get hung up on like, but what precisely are we saying here? And then similarly, the rocks demand, the waters flow, respect their form. Resound feels a little bit like we're finding a rhyme there, both when it meets and as it leaves. And I like that, the collision and the departure. I like the evocation of both of those kinds of movements, but it feels like the language is not very precise here to describe what exactly is happening. We're talking about water moving around rocks. Like, again, if you read it with your eyes unfocused, sort of stepped back and not trying to grip too tightly what is being said, you can get a feel for, broadly speaking, what is meant. But like, if I imagine reading this with English as a second language, then I start to really get tripped up on what's going on. And I get
That's
like,
great.
I really want, I don't know, like I am a, you know, I recognize the moral flaw in myself that dislikes rhyming S with non-S, but like a genuine part of my readerly experience is that I really want the descriptions and the grammar to be crisp. I want it to be exactly right.
Yeah.
I don't mean exactly right as in like le mot juste. I mean like I want it to really mean and be really correctly constructed. And to me, this is very close and very intuitively persuasive, but it's not quite flush. It doesn't all quite lock together in place. Similar, and then I think I have a similar feeling about like I bet if she'd have faced this log, and I love the impulse here. I love the like the lyric instinct here,
Yeah.
which is like we're no longer talking about this memory. We're now picking up this set of images and we're applying them to a moment in the present. And
Right. So we're going from line
yeah,
eight. She's still slash a
yeah.
graven image in my
You know,
mind.
but yeah, she's still a graven image in my mind. To me, that's also filler, right? She's still M dash, a graven
Yes.
image in my mind. What are we saying here? You're saying I still remember her, right?
Yes, no, that's actually that's a very good point that
That's fine.
I've been
She's
wowed by music.
still
Yes, no, yeah.
the
Your
emphasis where the
skepticism is
line break
correct there.
says like makes she still seem like that's an important statement, like she's not moving, but our memory is not really of her moving. It's
A
of her
graven
hair.
image in my mind.
And then a
Yes.
graven image, that phrase, that specific construction, the only place I locate that phrase in my memory is the Ten Commandments, right? Graven images,
Mm.
the
Right,
prohibition
right,
against
right.
graven images. And so then I think like, okay, well, you can evoke that, you can call that to mind, but why?
No, I
What?
think you're right. That's a
Yeah.
very well
So,
placed,
there's
slightly
something about
meaningless
she's still a
sentence
graven
that
image in my
ends.
mind that I think like, I'm not
Yeah.
sure what you're saying there that needs to be said.
Yes.
I bet if she'd have faced this log, she'd have the skill I don't. The skill I don't is a great line break. It's perfectly clear in presenting its simple denotation. She'd have the skill I don't have. They also work as two separate sentences almost. She'd have the skill. I don't have the skill.
Mm.
And it imagines the solution and then returns us to the present where there is no solution. But to swim around, and I think about like, okay, when I've run into logs in the water, yeah, I think whether it's log, rock, whatever, I bet if she'd have faced this log, the she'd have faced is an odd construction because it sets us back in the past with her rather than just being like a subjunctive, right? If she faced, like if in a world in which she faced this log, the way I'm facing it would be like the subjunctive construction versus I bet if she'd have faced is imagining something about her past, which seems odd. But you're asking a lot, I think, of log to leap us into the present, although your construction has the imagined woman in the past still, and then get us to assume you're speaking figuratively rather than literally. She'd have the skill I don't to swim around. I also then am just sort of wondering like what is the reader, the problem with the speaker is that she wasn't a good swimmer then, and that this lady would be a good swimmer. it feels like the suggestion, I think, and the theme that I like and I sympathize with is this reminds me, by the way, the feel of this poem very much reminds me of Chelsea Rathburn's poetry. Worth maybe a look. I think her poem of hers has come up on the podcast recently, but she's quite good, I think. And she writes a lot about relationships and Ashley Anna Q, I should say, whose new book is going to be coming out with somebody. I can't remember. It's accepted. It was accepted by somebody, and I don't want to say because I don't want to get it wrong, but they're both Southern poets who write about metaphorically about social and emotional crises in terms of figures and the landscape of Southern living. But yeah, so I think I'm just like it's a little bit. It's like if I unfocus my eyes and I keep a loose grip, I can feel what it might as well mean. But it's really not clear to me if I follow it crisply word by word and line by line. And then I love the rhythm of forgive, forget, it's a cliche, but I love throwing that in as it's the lightness with which it's thrown in is very convincing because it suggests that the speaker knows this is the thing to do and yet can't do it. The problem, of course, is that for one thing, we've had not nearly enough context to get a sense of what that is, to what that applies to, and it does not feel at all intuitive to me that the physical metaphor for forgiving and forgetting is swimming around a log. Seems like if there's a metaphor for like what is the metaphorical equivalent of forgiving and forgetting? If basically presumably the speaker has encountered a crisis in their life where what they really need to do is forgive and forget, and they imagine this experienced older woman who back when she had her gray hair, it feels like she would have been able to do this. Something about her hair suggests she would have had this knowledge. She would have known how to forgive and forget. I don't know that even now. But why is the image of forgiving and forgetting swimming around a log? And was this the problem back then that you didn't know how to swim? Like, granted, it can be tricky when you're tubing down a river to know how to navigate. The same, like, if you're rafting, I've gone on rafts, I've gone on canoes, I've gone in tubes. They all require different skills, and it can be tricky. But it feels like you're for one thing you're saying like dumb old me, I didn't know how to swim. I bet that old lady knew how to swim. Also, that like swimming around a log is forgiving and forgetting. So to me, it's like I get the motion of the poem, and I really like it. But you just all of the screws are looser and looser as they go along, and by the end, I feel like the whole machine's just rattling wildly. So I think that's my obsessive, annoying reading of it. Although broadly speaking, I think I share your felt response.
I mean, obviously there are two more lines right after forgive and forget.
Two more lines,
But age without due wisdom gets no crown. She could
Where's
have
the
been
crown
just
from
like
come?
me.
Right, the crown feels like it's pure rhyme, right?
Right, yeah. She could have just be. She could be just like me here as I drown. Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't disagree with any of your criticisms, firstly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to argue with any of them. I think most of them land less powerfully for me. Like, for me, my mind's like, yes, that is true, but the music and the logic of image, not the logic of metaphor, nor simply logic, but the logic of image, or we might say the particular procession of images in this poem, that particular procession does convince me. And I think forgive, forget is a very cliched, obviously, formulation.
But I love that moment in the poem. It feels
Right, yeah,
it feels great.
no.
Yeah, it's like
It's perfect, like perfectly musically
it's as easy
driven.
as reciting a cliche to name the thing that you should do, and yet you still can't do it. That feels
Right,
totally
exactly.
emotionally true.
Exactly.
I love that. I love that. Yeah.
Yes, no, that luxuriance, that ease to it is beautiful. And yet, at the same time, how it hammers in to the rhyme scheme, into the movement of the poem, in like obviously in my preferred version, how it ends the poem is just such like a beautifully, I don't know, it's a velvet hammer. It's luxurious and yet it's still violent. But like I guess I take your point in that, like, yes, I know kind of what you mean in that moving around a log doesn't logically compute with forgiving and forgetting. But at the same time, I don't know, I'm convinced by the image. The image has a force to it that I take in, both on first reading, when I guess I'm doing something that might be called skimming. I'm moving over the sound the surface of the poem, listening to the sound and like the less subtle images. And then when I'm rereading with like the intensity of wanting to, work out what's wrong, what's good and what's bad with it. I don't know, like it's not that I disagree with any of your criticisms, it's that like I'm simply swept up in the poem and the poem makes enough intuitive sense that none of your criticisms strike me as essentially important, which is not to say that
Sure.
they're not.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
just to say
That's
that
fine.
like that's my reading. But then
Yeah, yeah,
again, yeah,
yeah. I
this is
get
all
I get tangled up in them, but for you, they're
yeah.
negligible, and that they don't affect the overall feeling of the poem. So that
I
seems
think this is a
reasonable.
sort of a
But
nice
yeah, you think you're. I don't know if
sorry,
I
go
would
on.
simply cut the last two lines, but I agree with you that there's a real problem there.
Yeah, I
Um,
just don't know what they're doing that forgive and forget don't
it
do.
feels much
And
less like the emotional crescendo of the poem is forgive, forget.
drown is melodramatic.
Well, yeah, it feels
Um,
like I mean it feels like you're I mean it's a cliche in many senses, but it's hard not to think of the Stevie Smith poem. It also I
not
think like
waving, not driving.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was out here all my life and not waving for drowning, but
And of course Prof Rock, right? Till
yeah,
human voices wake
yeah,
us and we
Death by
drown.
Water, yeah. Yeah, yes, yeah, no, right, yeah, no, sorry, I was thinking of Death by Water as the wasteland, but yeah, it's human voices wake us and we drown till human voices wake us and we drown at the end of Proof Rock.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think it may be like it's just 1 degree too far at the like by the time I get there, then I think like, okay, wait a minute, why is this lady so wise? Because she had a gray braid? Like it's like I'm kind of swept up in the I don't worry too much about all of the assumptions about what this old lady would have been able to do. But then by the time we get to like, okay, we're really talking about the no crown is feels very much like it's tacked on, and then she could be just like me here as I drown. And that's an
Mm.
example of caesuras that I think are really not serving the line. They break
Right,
they
no.
cut against the meter, and they really put a strong emphasis on reading as I drown
As
in
an
a very
anapath,
direct
yeah.
way. And it's like but it's not true. You're not drowning. Like you're not talking
Yeah.
about drowning. So it feels like you're asking all for me the pressures of the tension between the feel of the poem and the technical meaning of the poem come to basically build and build and build, and then by the time they reach that couplet they just explode.
Mm.
And so it may be for you that sort of it's like as long as you can stop it before there's a total combustion, it's good enough. And I
Yes.
think
I would take
yeah,
that.
for
I
me
agree with
that like
that.
we have slightly different experiences, but I think both of us agree that that last stanza, that last couplet,
Mm.
it falls apart.
No, I totally agree. Yes. No, I think we're both agreed on this. And I think like, yeah, you can either take my opinion, which is maybe the slightly nicer opinion, strangely, that like I think the 12 lines work, although you have convinced me, sorry, I'm just trying to get to it. You have convinced me that the she's still M dash a graven image in my mind. You have convinced me that yes, that line is kind of meaningless in the context of the
Yeah.
poem.
Well,
I don't
and
think it does
the
anything.
meaning that it calls up seems not necessarily to be serving the poem.
Well, yeah, it's
Yeah.
unnecessarily
I mean,
meaningful,
one of
yes.
my many
Sure.
refrains in the fiction class I teach is if it works, you get to do it. So I will say
Mm,
here as there, like if your writing produces in the reader the desired effect, then like it doesn't matter whether it breaks rules or not. You get to do it. I would just say whether or not you change anything about this poem, it's good to be aware of these as technical
oh, for
problems,
sure.
and
For
maybe
sure.
to be like whatever you do in other poems, I would just make sure that you're doing it not because you are unable not to do it.
Yes.
I want you to be doing it out of choice and with control, and not because you've never bothered to learn how to do it another way.
Yes. No, I totally agree. I totally
Um,
agree.
yeah, but yeah,
Okay.
this is a very good draft. I mean, a very like yeah, it's a very very good poem to send in.
Yeah. No, I really liked
Yeah.
it.